Human sacrifice and animal sacrifice that we consider primitive and behind us and barbaric is a completely logical behaviour, and we have not escaped from the same psychological forces that drove our ancestors to participate in such rituals. And today I'm going to show you why that is. And in this video you're going to see why you will never understand mankind, human nature, religion, psychology, pretty much anything about these lofty topics like morality and being a good person without confronting these realities of why we murdered animals ritualistically and why we went on to murder people in the same way. Now, in order for me to teach you what I'd like to teach you, I'm going to have to show you some absolutely horrific and gory videos. There's going to be blood, there's going to be pain, there's going to be animals screaming as they get cut in half. This is not going to be nice. Most people will not be able to actually watch this video, which I understand. I'm going to be a bit more moody than usual. It's very, very hard content, but nonetheless, it is real, and it's very important for us moderns to confront these realities that exist within what I'm about to show you. So viewer discretion is advised. This is going to be gnarly, this is going to be nasty, but it's going to show us something very difficult and intimate about life. So I want to start by having you watch this gazelle get eaten alive by African hunting dogs. So as you can see, this is unbelievably brutal. This young gazelle has been caught by African dogs, and unfortunately for her, African dogs do not kill their prey usually because it takes too much time. They are the smallest predators out there, so they need to be fast when they're gathering their meals before the lions show up. So they instead go straight to the softest part of the gazelle and begin to feast immediately, grabbing as much meat as they possibly can. So they tear open the gazelle's stomach and eat out its intestines, the liver, the guts, the kidneys, the organs. They go for the soft, easy to eat, juicy, high nutrition parts of the gazelle. The gazelle's final moments are ones of incredible pain. This is basically being tortured to death. It would come as an incredible shock. The gazelle would have no understanding of what is happening. It can't make sense of what is happening. They've never been through something this painful before in its life, and now all of a sudden it's getting torn apart mercilessly by these rabid, savage beasts that have chased her down and killed her. Now we, humans, have spent millions of years watching this take place. We have looked out into nature and seen this over and over again. Gazelles, cows, sheep, ruminants get torn apart by these brutal, savage predators. And we've never seen an animal get saved. No god has ever come down and protected the animal from these hyenas. No morality that we have set up about being nice to each other and loving thy neighbour has ever led to any type of consequence for these hyenas. There is no mercy. It doesn't matter how brutal and how crooked and evil and savage the animals treat this gazelle, it is not going to make a single bit of difference to what happens next. Because what always happens next is the gazelle dies in excruciating pain, and the hyenas and the African dogs and the lions and the predators go on to become more powerful, and they get rewarded for their nastiness and their brutality. They get rewarded for the evil that they commit. And this is always sat like a thorn inside of our minds. Now, apologies if I come across a little more moody and less chirpy than usual, because this is a hard watch. It's hard to contemplate these topics, but I am doing this because I think it's critical for you to reclaim your soul. You see, I don't think you can be moral. You can talk about these things like God and mercy and the high, beautiful ideals without confronting these savage parts of life. There's many philosophers, many people who like to talk about pretty things in the human race, but not many people who are able to look at these ugly, dark and savage parts of life and confront them honestly. But it's those people who achieve what we might call insight. Carl Jung has some brilliant quotes on this specific topic. Achieving consciousness or enlightenment or developing a higher spirit is actually not about praying to angels or thinking about beams of light shining down upon you. It is not this hipster nonsense that we see so much in the modern West. It is not this pontification that people try to sell themselves on so much these days. Knowledge comes from confronting the ugly and the dark. Consciousness is achieved when you take something that is hidden and you reveal it. You force yourself to pay attention to something that you were previously avoiding. And if you wish to be good, moral, you can't really do it without looking square in the face of nature's savagery. Nonetheless, it is precisely this capacity for consciousness that makes us men stand out as something separate from nature. We might be the first animals who can observe all this and ask ourselves a question: what does this mean? We are able to look at nature and ponder, why is it so evil? Why is it so nasty, brutal, and savage? And this capacity that we have, our awareness that allows us to see that life is a torture chamber, also gives us attributes that we consider sacred, such as our ability to empathize, our ability to imagine and become aware of what somebody else's reality is like, and think, what would it be like to be in that person's shoes? Something that we all treasure so much. Well, of course, we evolved that capacity millions of years ago. And so our ancestors have spent those millions of years watching these moments take place, seeing these gazelles get torn apart limb from limb. And of course, we've been able to say to ourselves, God, it wouldn't be nice to be that gazelle. Why do we have to live in a world that has this amount of pain? That gazelle is innocent. That gazelle did not choose to get born in this world. That gazelle is a kid. In nature, it's often the weak, the children, and the elderly who are targeted most brutally because they are the easiest to eat. And therefore, we would see some baby gazelle get shredded apart and its organs chewed to pieces in front of its face, like some type of gnarly, traumatic, heavy metal, disgusting torture. And we would say to ourselves, what type of world do we live in? Why is it so brutal and savage? What did a gazelle do to deserve such an end? And it was here that mankind came up against its first and original and deepest problem with life. We are participants in nature. We come out of nature. We are like the hyenas. We steal gazelles all the time and we murder them and eat their organs. We are part of this like all the other animals. And we are aware that we are killing these animals. We are hurting these animals and we are torturing these animals. And this builds up inside of us an enormous guilt. Because of our capacity to be aware and understand what we are doing, it hits us in our souls. It creates a heaviness, and that's very difficult to handle. The hyenas are strangely blessed in their lack of ability for consciousness, because they can just be hyenas. They can be demons of murder, dogs of war, but we are not like this. Something is special about us where we can contemplate what we are doing, and this puts a great burden on our hearts. And this is not some abstraction, even though it might seem that way for us moderns who live in our comfortable cities. We were forced to confront these realities 3 times a day when we ate food in the ancient world. If we lived in the jungle, in order for us to exist at all, we would have to kill things all the time. We would be consistently murdering other parts of nature, and we would be taking on this karmic guilt, this fear about what are the consequences for this action. If we're hurting this animal, we wouldn't like that done to us. Is there not some type of punishment? Is there not something off about this? This creates a confusion, a weight. So as we evolve to become more aware of the fact that we are angels of death, predators enacting misery, suffering, and torture upon nature itself, the guilt, the trauma, and the pain got heavier and heavier and heavier inside of us. We developed a depth that no other animal had before. And out of this guilt and out of this pain, out of this struggle we have with the evilness that requires our sustenance, religion was born in mankind. So what we call religious rituals emerged out of primitive mankind trying to cope with this guilt. The same terror and horror and gnarliness that you feel looking at these animals get torn apart is the same problems that these men had all those years ago when they had to slit the throat of some animal that they caught. They had to deal with the gnarly, disgusting realities of life as they butchered something that they knew had a soul, that they knew had sentience, and they knew could feel the pain that they were inflicting upon them. And this is difficult. They needed to express this somehow, to make sense of what is going on. The most fundamental of all of these rituals is animal sacrifice, because hunger and murder are the foundations of which life is sustained upon. There would be no life without us going on the hunt and killing something and taking its life. And these are enormous dramatic events when they happen. You can see the pain and agony that these animals go through. We understand that that's a huge amount of pain for us men to cause in this world. We are stealing from this animal their life at the cost of enormous suffering so that we can sustain our own. We are creating life out of death, or worse, we are creating death so that we can have life. There's some type of deal going on. In order for us to continue to exist, we must take the life out of them. We must cause this balance in the universe where they lose what they have so that we gain it. Now, our ancestors were not stupid. In the primal world, we could see that there should be a consequence for this. There's a natural logic of cause and effect. People discovered Newton's laws of thermodynamics long before we formalized them. They understood that if something was going to die, there's probably going to be a consequence of some sort. If you kick your brother punches you back. There's this feeling that something has to go on. There has to be a consequence. To gain food like this, using murder feels like bad karma. Now, we moderns actually don't feel this as clearly. We have a distant feeling to this, but not because we are above this. We are above the primal ancestors. In fact, it's because we have hidden from ourselves the barbarity of how our food is made. We hire a guy wearing an apron to cut up our animals for us and take on the karmic debt, and go to the slaughterhouse and tear these animals limb from limb and present it all in a shiny little plastic package where they paintbrush it with little red feckles to make sure that the meat looks nice and good. And of course, this is a lie. This is why veganism appears as a quasi-religion in the modern world, because video media allows us to once again see the reality of brutal murder that goes on with our food. 3 meals a day come at the cost of extreme torture, extreme pain. And we walk around in our civilized societies promoting our civilized ideals, talking about how we're so noble, we're so moral, and how we care about the foreigners, and how we care about people that should be cared about, and how we're so goddamn good. But 3 times a day, we're participating in the brutal murder of an animal that was innocent. And us moderns are so unreligious that we can't honestly confront these realities. So we have to hide them. And when people discover these realities through the phone, through YouTube, whatever it is, they turn vegan because it's very convincing. When you see this stuff, nothing can quite justify it. They're hit right in their souls with the primal guilt that our ancestors have always felt. And something enormously psychologically traumatic is forced upon them, and they have to wrestle with it. The vegans are much more honest than most of the bumpkin idiots who say, like, yeah, I like my steak, bro. Yeah, I'm a tough guy, I'm a real man because I eat my burgers and I don't care about the fact that my burger is made in a slaughterhouse. Yeah, that's what makes you a big tough guy. That's what manliness is, isn't it? Grilling burgers and drinking beer, yeah, that's a real man. That's what we call virility. You're too badass to care about any of this stuff. It's all woke nonsense. We understand. Now, to get back to the point, I'm saying all this because I want to make it clear that these emotions hit us on a fundamental and primal way even today. When a vegan opens up their YouTube and looks at an animal getting its throat slit for the first time in their lives, all of a sudden all the connections happen in their head and they can never look at that plate of meat again because something is now different, and they're forced to confront that deep, primal experience of guilt. And of course, most of us moderns like that this stuff is hidden from us so we don't have to experience these emotions and transform into some type of vegan falafel-eating dork. But the ancients could not hide this. They were forced to confront this. They were forced to go out there and kill that animal. And because of the way that the world worked in the village, oftentimes everybody in the village would hear the animal's dying screams. These things could not be brought away into a far-off factory where terrible things happen in sterilized metal torture chambers. No, instead, an ancient livestock farmer would have to raise the specific animal, and everybody in the village would know the animal. The farmer would intimately know the animal. He would give it a name. Your daughter would see the animal's character and personality, because animals do have character and personality. She would call it Joey or Mary the cow. And then you one day would turn around and you would slit Joey's throat. And this trauma and this guilt would be passed onto you. Your daughter would judge you for doing this. You would judge yourself for doing this. Your daughter would judge herself for doing this. You know that your daughter, in order for her to grow big and strong and beautiful and grow full lips and nice rosy cheeks, she's going to have to eat this meat. But this would often happen to an aware, delicate human, that they would experience this and they might start to reject the food or something like this. They would feel weird about it. The child would be sensitive to these very, very big problems, and she might stop eating and stop nourishing herself. And you would have to overcome this in some way. These become serious problems. The heavy guilt would weigh down upon everybody. It would seem savage, evil to just callously take the animal's soul. So what we would have to do in response to this is ritualize this, is make this sacred, is to treat this with the gravity and the drama that it deserves, because it's a big moment. We have to honor the cow before we take its life and take its nourishment. It's important that we treat these things well. Now, this might seem weird for us moderns, but there's quite fascinating logic to this. For example, our callous, hidden and irresponsible way of dealing with our food actually leads us to become more healthy. Because we do not honor and worship our food, we end up poisoning ourselves. We say, oh, just fire all those cows into these grain silos and feed them corn and slop. We just need meat. As long as the burgers show up at McDonald's, we're happy. But it turns out that when you feed these animals horrible grain diets and keep them locked inside with no sun in these terrible conditions, that the meat that they produce and the milk they produce is less nutritious, significantly less nutritious than it would be if you allowed them to roam free in a joyous world of grass and sunlight and hills. Now that's fascinating. When you don't honor your food in this cause and effect of nature becomes less powerful. It gives you less life because you don't commit to life in return. Fascinating concept right there. So you can see the ancient wisdom in here actually comes to pay off if you take it seriously, and this is something that ancient man had to confront. Now, something quite fascinating is you can use this same phone to look at slaughterhouses to actually see modern animal sacrifices, because they still go on in the Hindu world. You can see villages gather together, bring out their sacred cow, their chosen food, and create a drama around it and put flowers upon the animal and then absolutely brutally shear off its head or cut it in half or something like this. And this, of course, is really intense for us to watch, but it is fundamentally man's primal expression of him trying to deal with this enormous event. Because in this moment, this animal's life is taken and life is gained for the entire village as a consequence. There's an incredible trade happening in this moment. And as savage and crooked and weird these behaviors are, they are actually honoring something that we tend to ignore in our modern world. And so what mankind is expressing through animal sacrifice is the world's oldest and original religion. The fundamental law that makes up life's fundamental philosophy, which is that death feeds life, that murder feeds life, that life eats life. For every gain we wish to make in vitality and strength, something must be killed. Something must have its heart ripped out of its chest. For us to be nourished, something must go through pain. Something must lose. And mankind, as we see in modern life, is unbelievably irresponsible. It's very hard for us to handle consciousness and awareness. It's very hard for us to empathize. We would rather pretend that this stuff isn't real. And so animal sacrifice, the religious nature of it, the way that we unconsciously force ourselves to conduct these rituals, is very powerful for keeping us grounded to reality, to force us not to offend the gods, to offend nature, to throw nature out of balance. It forces us to have respect for what we are doing, because when we lose that respect, We get rid of that religious behavior. We say that we are above these types of processes. All of a sudden we start to feed our animals corn, inject them full of antibiotics to make them poison bombs, stick them in these plastics that fill our bodies with microplastics that turn off our hormones and castrate us. And then everybody becomes aware of this and starts to grow tumors in the lab saying that they've made fake meat, and everybody else becomes a vegan. Society falls apart when we think we are above these ancient truths. Are you ready? Here's the Uberboyo thesis. It is because we do not sacrifice animals that everybody is transforming into a soy boy. Now, let us move on and talk about human sacrifice. If you thought the last section was enough to write Steph off and say, alright, this YouTuber is definitely crazy. I'm going to call my psychiatrist and say, I'm going to book in this YouTuber as a favor, send him over to you, talk him out of this stuff. He's talking about animal sacrifice. Well, let's get into killing people. This law of cause and effect is critical to understand. The ancient man knew that if he was to gain anything, he would have to give something up. He must sacrifice if he wishes to gain. An animal has to die if the man wishes to be nourished and become strong. For every step forward you want in life, an expansion of some sort, something else must get destroyed. And the most basic form of human sacrifice is premised on this, and this comes from war and conquest. War is the expansion of one tribe and the consumption of another. War is one tribe beating another tribe into submission so they can sacrifice them all to their will. If you wish to grow your tribe, there are some brutal realities that you must face. You're going to need territory. You're going to need people who work as slaves. You're going to need more women that you can breed in order to create more people. In order for you to grow in power, you're going to need to take things that are not yours. The foundational sacrifice that you make to get these boons for your tribe is your young men. You take the most powerful, beautiful, healthy, strong males in your entire society at the peak of their power, and you send them out to war. War is human sacrifice of the best and the beautiful to violence. And in return, your tribe will get expansion, strength, and domination. And war itself has always been understood as a religious ritual in this way. It has always been seen as something sacred and majestic. It has always been treated with the utmost respect. What is happening is a tribe and another tribe are gathering their best men, the ideal men that they have crafted through all their culture and all their work, and they're sending them to fight against each other. It is violent competition to decide what is the true meaning of excellence, using the objective reality of war. The best men are sacrificed towards discovering what is the most beautiful, the most profound, the most powerful, and the most righteous in its strength. Strangely, if you look in modern tribes that still live in the Australian outback or the Amazon forest or Africa, you'll see that the way they engage in war is an extremely ritualized behavior. It looks sort of similar to how we do sports. They will arrange two teams up against each other, and they will do lots of dances and summon many gods, and they will stand up and make these proud pronouncements and recite poetry at each other, have a little bit of a rap battle before they fight each other. And for us moderns, it's only been 100 years since war has turned into this terrible thing that we see it as nowadays. Modern war is not glorious, it is not ritualized, it is ugly, sterile, and pointless. This is what many men learned in World War I, as they sat in the trenches and had these giant organized machines cut through all of this ground and tear up their friends in this completely meaningless bickering over territory. A lot of these men felt that they were just dying for some type of banking families of some sort. The war that they read about in the Iliad, the war that they read about in the ancient world of the knights in shining armor going on a crusade, this was not the war that they expected. There was no heroism inside of this. There was no majesty and profoundness. Instead, it had turned into something ugly and sterile, surprisingly archetypal to what we experience with our food. It has become soulless. It has lost its power. Even think about the nature of military behaviour. Modern war is conducted by men in camouflage suits with these drab, grey outfits, whereas ancient war was all about these sharp, snazzy uniforms. Napoleon's army was dressed in the finest navy blues. The Grande Armée, the elite factions, would dress in basically modern suits and then charge at each other across a field, marching towards cannons while their friends are getting blown up, and they would hold formation in order to win in the most stylish and forceful way. Ancient war always had people decorated in these beautiful accolades during battle. Alexander the Great would wear this gorgeous helmet on top of his head, which made him easily recognized. The Polish hussars would carry on their backs enormous wings. They were known as the winged hussars, and they would have looked like angels of death charging upon the battlefield. But is there any riz for a modern soldier? You're stuck in grey or khaki camouflage. It is quite drab. Now, there is a flip side of war that's important to understand, the secret truth of what is operating in war, where it is a noble, objective clash of the best, of the ideals, of the grandest and the strongest against each other, deciding who will become winner. And what happens is the winner defeats the loser. And the loser is then destroyed and consumed by the winner, just like the hyena eating the gazelle. All the men are murdered by the winners, and all the women are taken and raped. When the Mongols used to plunder and conquer cities, they would take the female population out of the city, put them all into the church or the mosque of the city that they conquered, and then rape them in front of the men before cutting everybody's head off and then stacking these skulls in pyramids outside the cities. This was an unbelievably brutal and barbarous consumption and digestion of the losers. The losing city would be entirely churned up like they had just gone into the stomach of some type of beast and had been dissolved into nothing. Sometimes the Mongols would even eat people they were known to cannibalize on occasion. The Mongols were apex predators, literally eating and digesting their prey. Their prey was sacrificed to their will. They could be transformed into whatever the Mongols wished. If they wished to take all the beautiful women and make them sex slaves, that is what was going to happen. If they wished to take the men and make them engineer slaves within their armies, that is what was going to happen. If every other male and female was of no use to them, they would be burned, destroyed, killed in whatever way, because the Mongols have ultimate authority in this situation. The breaking of the loser, the use of the loser, the loss of the loser of their freedom and their will was permanent and final once the matters of war were decided. Now, this brutal logic and reality is the hidden premise for why a lot of human sacrifice would happen. Often the most shocking style of human sacrifice, where large amounts of people were sacrificed. Take, for example, the famous Aztecs. They conducted human sacrifice this way, by taking populations of men that they had conquered and bringing them up on top of their pyramids, holding them down, cutting out their hearts and holding it in front of their face while it was beating blood, and then sacrificing it to Quetzalcoatl. Their souls were fed to the will of the Aztecs, and the representation of the Aztecs' will was their god. This should teach you something quite barbaric about the origin of God. You have a tribe of people, and they're like an ant farm, and their united will, all of them working together, is like having a spirit looming over the ant farm, the uber ant, the over ant, whatever you want to call it, the oversoul of the ant farm. And this is the coordinating power of this united force. And of course, these tribes, like the Aztecs, had the same thing going on. They had a representation of themselves that they could sacrifice things towards. The greater will that was their aim. When they would go to war, they were sacrificing their most beautiful warriors to the expansion of this will. This is how they would make this logical sense. They would say to themselves, okay, we will give up all these handsome men to the carnage and terror of war, and we will give these men to you so that you can expand and you can grow and you can give us greater expansion and growth as a consequence. And it is just the same then when they would harvest their enemies and their rivals and bring them back to their temples and feed all these enemies and rivals to the same oversoul and will. The Aztec oversoul was looming over these temples and literally feeding off their psychic torture, consuming their pain and their suffering like a hyena eating a gazelle. And so what we see happening here is the evolution inside of man of something quite profound. God, the oversoul. Many people look at the God of the Bible and see this savageness, this barbarity of some type of force that has emerged out of the primal world of nature. They see in Yahweh a monster. Yahweh says to the Israelites, go and annihilate Jericho, kill all their children, kill all their women, kill their donkeys, kill everything. Annihilate, level the entire city. This total consumption of the Mongols is expressed right here in the book of morality. This is critical in the evolution of mankind because as tribes began to grow, these oversouls become more and more important. The God above the tribe becomes more significant because as the tribes get bigger, this united spiritual will is the actual force that is at war, the national God leading the peoples. And these gods demand many lives to remain in power. The story of prehistory is always of one tribe overcoming another and enslaving them. When the Romans would march into a territory that they conquer, they would allow the people to exist, but they had to bow down to Jupiter. It was always some type of religious, spiritual dominance. The assertion that Jupiter was the big dog was important for the Romans. It was the ultimate symbol of their power. They would always force the locals to kneel at Jupiter alongside their own gods, to understand that the Jupiter oversoul is the big oversoul that all other gods are submissive to. It was an abstract representation of the power dynamic that existed on Earth between the Romans and the other tribes. This is why they enforced it this way. And so what you see here is man is becoming very sophisticated. He once was looking directly at animals and conducting rituals of sacrifice in order to deal with these emotions that come from killing these animals to eat. And you saw how out of war emerges these profound rituals of human sacrifice of enemies and things like this. But now we're transforming into a much more abstract people. We have these conceptions of the oversoul and the gods, and man is learning to worship these. And through this they're worshipping power and strength and themselves and the broader tribe, and therefore life itself. As Nietzsche said, God was conceptualized by man as a spirit or character they could offer their conquests to. This father would take a tribe under its wing and bless them with beauty, strength and health so long as they feed him their rivals. All gods began as a monstrous spirit leading a colony of murderers. And so it soon became clear that beyond these rivals that were feeding their gods, these beautiful warriors dying for this greater good of the tribe were also worthy sacrifices to these grand spirits. And all these sacrifices for this oversoul began to evolve over time, and it rolled along with savage logic. Mankind began to learn and formalize and ritualize the idea that when we sacrifice what is exceptional and beautiful, we give what is excellent to the overlord. He gives us in return expansions in our power. And so we start to see one of the most weird and strange forms of human sacrifice, much different than taking a tribe of rivals and tearing their hearts out on top of a temple. Instead, this is where we see the sacrifice of the beautiful. And this would happen across all sorts of cultures. If people were born particularly beautiful, particularly intelligent, particularly excellent, particularly tall, or something like this, sometimes they would be targeted for those outstanding traits and given to the god as a sacrifice. And this could turn into all sorts of profound cultural artifacts. For example, next time a girl brings up astrology with you, you should remind her that the Aztecs used to take a child that had a particularly benevolent astrological birth sign and they would sacrifice that child. They would raise the child, often to grow into a beautiful youth, after which the child would be bought off the parents, and then the child would be sacrificed. Sometimes the youth may grow into a beautiful boy, in which case they would be treated like a rock star, given a divine right to sleep with any woman they want, and have any food that they wish for an entire year, and then after this they would be sacrificed upon the temple to the gods. But indeed, perhaps us civilized Westerners are above this type of nonsense. Well, of course, our dear Dionysus from the Greek myths is not much better than this. Dionysus in Greek tragedy was such a beautiful youth. He was born a son of the Oversoul. He was Zeus's child, and he was ideal, and he was beautiful, and he was transient. And he would arrive from a far-off land, having been cultivated essentially into an angel, and he would come showing people grand wisdom and grand beauty. And he would be paraded around the tribe as this beautiful youth, intoxicating everybody in his presence. This would stir up the women particularly, who would fall in love with his youthful glory. They would get wound up into a frenzy, and they would chase him up a mountain, where they would throw a festival together. And during this festival, the women would transform into hyenas. They would lose themselves to their primal instincts. The orgy of love, the orgy of beauty and youth would overcome them, and they would all mate with Dionysus. They would all breed with him, and in his final moments he would be fucked to death. And then they would tear him apart limb from limb and eat him alive, as the sex orgy would degenerate into a monstrous, savage feeding frenzy. Now, did this actually happen this way? We're not too sure. Is this an artifact of an old Greek human sacrifice ritual? That could be possible. Who knows? But there's something to think about if you're into looksmaxing. If women aren't tearing you apart in the club and eating your flesh, then are you really a 10? Can you really say that you've looksmaxed if women aren't tearing you apart and raping you to death? Now, this may have been the ancient Greek human sacrifice ritual, where the beautiful son is sacrificed to the unconscious will of the tribe, the longhouse of women. But as the Greeks matured, this behavior began to become more abstract. The actual human sacrifice started to move out of it, and the ritual began to get replaced through imitation, because something quite profound was taking place. The original part of this whole story was that man was confronting the guilt at participating in nature. Man was experiencing the murder of the animals and feeling a psychological disease inside of himself. And in order for him to deal with this, he would have to create a ritual where he would sacrifice the animal or sacrifice man in order to deal with an internal state. But as man has evolved and become more sophisticated, he is able to understand that these internal states, these psychological parts of our souls, can be wrestled with in imitation. They don't require us to act these things out in order for us to get catharsis, as the Greeks would say. And this is where, as Nietzsche would say, the birth of tragedy would come from. You see in drama, in art, in music, in tragedy, you see this evolution into a more abstract way of dealing with our internal emotions. And so art, theatre, drama, and religion are all essentially the same thing at a root. They all come from the same place, which is man wrestling with his soul. This is why music can be so moving to us. This is why music is Dionysian. This is why art is Dionysian and tragedy is Dionysian. And this is also the crux of what is going on with these behaviors. Art, religion, and music is an extension of human sacrifice. And so what would have happened initially is these Greeks would have moved away from killing the most beautiful and moved towards acting out the sacrifice of Dionysus. There would have been a point where one time the beautiful boy would have been asked to dress up and play act as Dionysus in a sacrificial play. And this would have began the imitation of the drama. And all of a sudden we would move away from that old way of doing things. And then these sacred plays would take the place of the rituals. Now, over time, what these replacement human sacrifices would do is teach the Greeks the importance of drama and the importance of these types of stories. Because what happens in the Dionysian human sacrifice is something beautiful, something perfect, something ideal. A beautiful boy full of potential, a blessing from God, loses his life, is murdered, is died. And it's very sad. It's a tragedy to witness something like this. To witness something beautiful get destroyed is crushing. But this is the cost of life. Life is bought at the price of higher beauty, at the price of sacrifice. It has to be tragic. It has to be sad for it to make sense. And so Greek culture would begin to see the value in the tragic life. They would see the value in this type of character. They would look at somebody like Alexander the Great and see beauty, strength, youth, power, all manifest in one person, and understand that in order for his life to have that level of power, he would have to die young in a moment of great tragedy, which is what exactly happened to him. One of the fundamental parts of Greek myth that's very foreign to us modern humans is that they don't have an idea necessarily of good or bad, but they have that old ancient understanding of cause and effect, of consequence. They understood the idea of hubris, which we might call arrogance, but basically meant a force. When a force rises up, a hubris always generates a nemesis, and these forces cancel themselves out. And so if Alexander the Great wants to shoot towards the stars and become a great, beautiful entity of joy and power and excellence, he's going to have to get squashed and crushed down by the nemesis that will arrive, and it will arrive in such profound ways. And in Alexander's case, it is probably a poisoning or an illness. Achilles was very similar. Achilles is offered the typical Greek offer, which is not straightforward. He is said, you can live as a happy man who is unknown. You can not go to this war where you're going to fight alongside Agamemnon and try to get Helen of Troy back for yourself. Instead, you can go live a happy life as a farmer and have loads of kids with a beautiful wife. Or you can go to the war, and in the war you will die, but you will live forever. And so Achilles has to confront the fact that if he wants to have the hubris of living forever, he will have to face the nemesis of an early death. And so he decides to follow this dream of power, and he dies in the passions of war, and nowadays we remember his name. And this archetype of the tragic life that came out of human sacrifice, that came out of these grand stories, that came out of this deep, profound culture of the ancient Greeks, this archetype of the great life that ends in tragedy, is what we call the hero. All tragedies have a hero who is all-powerful, a symbol of vitality and strength, and therefore he is destined to be destroyed or be betrayed. Now what we see is something quite magnificent. Human sacrifice has been abstracted into heroic plays. And this is what brings it. But there's something happening in Christianity that is quite strange. René Girard would often talk about this. An inversion is taking place. What we used to have to do is murder our most beautiful and offer it to God in order for us to gain more life, gain more vitality, and gain more freedom. This was the savage and internal logic of everything that mankind noticed in his participation in nature. There was always a consequence towards his gaining of strength. If he wanted food, he would have to take the life of something. There was something going on there. If he wanted strength and growth, he would have to sacrifice his great warriors, destroy the other tribe, give up what is beautiful in order for him to grow. But here we have a flipping of the whole table. Instead, God is offering himself to us. God is giving us endless vitality and strength. God is sacrificing himself so that we can live forever. The creator of the entire universe is destroying his entire body to give us all the power contained within this, which is of course limitless. He is God, he is the creator of everything. And of course, Christianity makes an awful lot of sense. All that stuff that these half-wits constantly talk about and recite in a very sleepy, unconscious way, saying all these things that they've heard people say about Christianity, compares nothing to what you see when you understand this. Christianity is the fulfillment of the procedure of mankind going from animal sacrifice to the more profound human sacrifice, carrying that savage logic of cause and effect in nature. Christ's life is a tragedy that forces us once again to confront that primal guilt that man was forced to confront when he meditated on the gazelle having his liver and spleen and kidney torn out of his body. That guilt of us participating in life and nature. Christianity is again forcing that into our face, and René Girard points this out. Just like when man became conscious and realized the horrificness of what he was doing in relationship to the animals, it's the same thing happening here. Christianity is forcing man to become conscious of the fact that he is hurting other man. People present Jesus as some type of angelic being floating on the clouds, covered in stars and bells and whistles and whatever you want to call it. But Christ's story is not about this. Christ's story is about confronting the shadow of civilization, the shadow of our cruelty. We are supposed to meditate on the passion and the suffering and the sins of the world that Christ took on his shoulders, which is all of our hate and all of our monstrousness and all of our desire to torture. We're supposed to sit there and look at his skin get torn off in Passion of the Christ. We're supposed to confront this so that we see that we are the hyenas in this world, that we have that monstrousness inside of ourselves. We are supposed to look at this stuff so we are destroyed by the guilt, so that heavy weight of psychology is imposed upon us once again. Because if we can confront and digest that heavy weight of guilt, that is what allows us to evolve to the next step of consciousness. This was the goal of Christianity. This is why God came down to teach us a lesson. And so we can only assume that Christ wanted to show us that we are acting like hyenas by standing up and offering himself to us. The most perfect, beautiful entity of all of creation, which is God himself, comes down, and we, in a festering rage, tear him apart with our teeth and destroy him, just like Dionysus being eaten on the mountain. God is suggesting that we could rise above nature and become moral, like how we all tell ourselves, like all these Pharisaic Jews would be saying to themselves. But they can't actually do it because they can't overcome the darkness and the cruelty within themselves. We can only achieve that if we become aware of what we are. And so Christ's human sacrifice is the final sacrifice. It is the end of the old primal world of sacrifice and suffering and the systems of pain, and the beginning of a new era where suffering, pain, guilt, and all these forces that are driving us to these crazy behaviors now become psychological. They now become a war within our souls. The kingdom of God is within, and the war that we must fight is within as well. This was the awakening of mankind, the liberation of mankind. If we have the strength, the spiritual strength to beat our own hearts, then we will be free in a way that we are never free before. We will actually be able to overcome nature by conquering our psychology. And every time we meditate on Christ's passion, we are participating in a human sacrifice. We are feeling all the same emotions that human sacrifices would have evoked in the past. Only we are the murderers. We are the Romans beating him to death, tearing his body limb from limb like the crazed women eating Dionysus. This is why the Catholics eat the body and the blood of Jesus in church. It's the same ancient primal ritual playing out, only now it is done in the abstract. Now it is done spiritually. We are the hyenas feeding off God's corpse, and that is the crux of our freedom. And so now that Christ has come down on earth and participated in the ultimate sacrifice, we are at the beginning of a new history. We have a year zero AD, where everything is different. Nothing is the same ever again. And since this moment, we are burdened with a new responsibility. Before, we were trapped within the system of cruelty that is nature, and we were doing rituals in order to cope with this and to deal with this, but we were trapped within the cycle of life that was going on there, and the fear and the scariness of the consequences of these actions. And we began to evolve this ability to understand that these emotions, these psychological emotions, are actually the challenge we are trying to overcome. And this is where the Greeks came up with tragedy. And now in Christianity, we have one of the most profound tragic stories in all of time. And this forces the entirety of this drama inside of us. It forces the whole experience to be psychological. And after year zero, man is now psychological. And therefore, man is responsible. It is our responsibility to be able to handle the guilt of participating in life. This is how Jesus sets us free. He takes on all the suffering and pain of nature and of the previous world, and he channels it all through him. Also, we can be free. He falls down and is killed on a cross so we can run. But we have to be able to stand up to the freedom. We have to be able to handle what he has offered us. You see, mankind moved from being ritualistically tortured on crosses and racks and sacrificial stones to now being a tortured soul. But that was only if we could handle the guilt in our heads. That's the only way we can become free from life's system of cruelty. But unfortunately, mankind is not very good at living up to this opportunity. It is excruciating trying to defeat demons that live in our own heads. You can think of somebody who's struggling with a mental health problem. You'll often notice them do things like cut themselves and damage themselves. Sometimes it's easier to live out actual pain than cope with chronic mental pain. Anguish and guilt can destroy us. And Freud even noticed this and discussed how it was easier for us to sublimate our inner war into something than to truly face it inside of ourselves psychologically. So despite Christ's liberation, we still see mankind sneak in his old ways back into life. We still see him act out this guilt and this trauma of being a part of life's system of cruelty. And the primary example of this is public executions. We might say to ourselves that we've overcome human sacrifices, but public executions in the medieval world were basically human sacrifices. They had all the drama wrapped up in them that we would come to expect from something like this. They were events that people treated almost like the movies, like a great Dionysian experience. A man was going to go through his final moments in front of a crowd. And people would show up to these with joy and perk, like they were bringing popcorn along to shovel it down into their mouths. And despite our solemn attitude towards the idea today, because we're so modern, we're so civilized, people would look forward to this. They would get deep emotional feelings out of it. As Aristotle said, they would get a catharsis out of watching somebody go through this experience. In fact, the more gnarly and drawn out the torture, the more moving and meaningful the event was. You see this most clearly in that elaborate high drama of Middle Ages torture. The Germans in the Holy Roman Empire, they were famous for peeling off a man's skin strip by strip while he was tied up in front of a crowd, literally skinning him alive. They also had something called breaking on the wheel, where they would tie a man up into a circular wheel and then snap every one of his limbs until he hung down like a sort of distorted spider. The Vikings were famous for cutting out somebody's lungs out of the back of their rib cage, pulling it out like a set of wings and having them suffocate while they waited for them to go through gnarly experiences. But they were degenerate pagan Nords, so Vikings stealing my Irish books, so we'd expect that from them. But what about the English? Well, the English would hang a man. They would drag him through the city by a horse, and then they would take him onto a rack and they would cut his guts out in front of him, just like the Aztecs that we say that we were so better than us noble Christians. They would tear out his intestines in front of him, and then they would cut out his heart, cut off his testicles, cut off his arms and his legs and then his head, and send them to the four corners of the British Empire. The French would tie you up to a post and burn you alive. And all across Europe you would hear stories like this of things like people being boiled in vats of oil as their skin would bubble and peel off their bodies. The world is a nasty place, my friends. We live in quite a profound bubble in modernity, where all of this suffering seems to have been pushed into hidden corners. And the thing about these experiences is how people would show up in droves to watch a man face such a monstrous fate, face such humiliation and vulnerability and pain. And there was this dramatic, heroic Dionysian experience to it. They were trying to see if the man had character, if he was able to face this with bravery. This was seen across cultures as well. Across over in the Aztec world, who had no contact with this part of the world, the same motifs would show up. Was a man able to die well when he was about to get tortured to death in the act of human sacrifice? And this would happen in France and all across Europe. The challenge that they had to be like Jesus, to carry the cross well, to face the torture and punishment with nobility and dignity and power. Could they face these final moments without crippling into a sobbing mess? And oftentimes they could win the crowd over by the end of it. They would gain their respect. The crowd would feel moved and feel the tragedy of this experience. It would start out them screaming their hate at this man because he was often a criminal. Maybe some of them would have a real reason to hate. But after they'd been through enough pain, after they would see them broken and humiliated, their testicles cut off, them standing in front of them with no skin, weeping in agony, then at that moment they might say the pain has been fulfilled. There's been enough. And they would say that they have done it. They've earned their respect for making it through the suffering. Now, what is interesting is that as we reach the Enlightenment, something enormous transformed in the European psyche. We begin to turn away from this type of cruelty. Perhaps Christianity finally took root. Perhaps the rational Enlightenment finally enforced these ideals of mercy into our consciousness. Perhaps we had evolved to a point where we were finally giving birth to this new higher level of awareness. Perhaps we had gotten rich enough for being the masters of a world during the colonial era that we began to contemplate these higher moral ideas. Whatever it was, we started to turn away from all things cruel and try to make cruel things more humane. And this word begins to show up. Is it humane? Is it humanitarian? Is it moral, the way that we are doing things? Is there any need for the excess of barbarity, savageness, and cruelty that we see so much in this world? Is there a way we can use our reason to remove such cruelty, to sterilize this experience? One example of this is the arrival of the guillotine. The guillotine took the place of the brutal torture of past executions. All of a sudden you weren't seeing these elaborate, torturous situations where people were having their skin peeled off or they're getting boiled alive for the experience of maximum pain. Instead, it was transformed into this lightning fast experience of having your head severed off in an instant. The problem with the old swinging the axe to cut off somebody's head is that it often didn't go that well. Skeletons are tough. Axemen can sometimes be inaccurate. The job is not always clean. There was many stories of axemen putting somebody's head on the chopping block and hitting their shoulder first, having to have 13 goes in order to crack their head off finally. And this did not sit well with the Europeans during the Enlightenment. They wanted it to be efficient and fast, rational and clean. They wanted humane murder. We see the same transformation happen with hanging. Hanging was quite a brutal affair. You used to wrap a noose around somebody's neck and string them up, and they would strangle and choke to death over the course of 15 minutes. 15 minutes of extraordinary agony before they would slip out of consciousness. But the drop style of hanging was much, much better because they would drop people from a height and their necks would snap almost instantly. It was considered humane. It would take out all the needless suffering. This becomes the theme. You see it, what is evolved into now. We tried to move away from hanging, from the guillotine, from getting shot up against the wall, and towards things like the electric chair, where people would be stunned, electrocuted, and killed in an instant, because we believed that it was fast and humane to do it this way. And nowadays we have the lethal injection. You lie down on your moment of death in this nice quiet room. You get to choose your last meal, and then you go into a bed like a hospital, and they come at you with a injection, put the injection inside of you, and you just drift off to sleep, dead, never to be here again. That is your punishment. Think for a moment about how strange this nice way of dying is. Nietzsche would point out in Genealogy of Morals Essay 2 that the logic, the indeed savage logic of torture and punishment, was always to do with getting an equal dose of suffering off the person who offended you. This was the whole point of it. So you're living in an ancient civilization, and if some guy caused you an issue, the idea was you wanted to take from him the same amount of pain that he caused you. If you stole something from somebody, which was a great labor for you to get, you wanted a piece of their flesh. Oftentimes people would try to take their hands or something like this, or cut a piece of their flesh off them. There was like an equation taking place, a balancing of the forces with that same savage primal logic. And of course then all these public executions and these tortures before these public executions, this is where this logic came from too. When somebody did something terrible like kill somebody or rape somebody or hurt somebody, the idea was you would take them and burn them at the stake or tear off their skin to put them through the suffering and pain that they caused. The punishment was how you brought a dramatic, psychic, suffering-based balance to the universe, which is quite an ugly way of looking at things, but how the primal world would think about this stuff. And now we have evolved this humaneness, which transforms these punishments into almost elegant affairs, soft affairs, gentle affairs that have none of the suffering. If somebody commits a wrong, they are well fed in a prison, and then they were put down, put to sleep like a dog being petted by a vet before it goes off into the afterlife. And this shows us a fascinating trend that is taking place in modern society since the Enlightenment. Our restriction of cruelty, our final desire to overcome cruelty itself. There's been a trend in recent years to really counter-signal the Enlightenment, to say that the Enlightenment is a bad thing and we've all become Satanists since the Enlightenment, and certainly the Enlightenment is not perfect. Nietzsche himself criticizes it in many brilliant ways. But we have to be honest, it was only since the Enlightenment has mankind actually developed real morality. We have really started to work on taking out cruelty from our lives. We've started to see cruelty as something that is below us, that is uncivilized, that is somber and dark, and should be, by our best efforts, gotten rid of. Characters like Schopenhauer, a dark, brutal pessimist, he appeared as a post-Enlightenment philosopher, and he was preaching for one of the first times in history about the compassion for animals that was necessary to live a correct life. European man as a whole, since the era of the Enlightenment and the industrialization, has made great efforts to organize his society in a much more gentle and moral and cruelty-free way. And it is important to understand that these rational constructs were well intentioned, and they often worked in reducing needless suffering in many instances, but they didn't conquer cruelty. One of their biggest problems is that most of the cruelty is not necessarily overcome, but it is merely hidden or distorted. It is bizarre to note how we have tried to beat nature, to remove cruelty from life, and what has happened is it's reappeared in a more indifferent, cold and strange way. Before, the sacrificial cow would have been marched through the streets and covered in flowers before it was held down by the tribe and butchered. Yes, that would have been savage. As we were saying earlier, it's quite crazy to look at when you see these things. But now, is what we do much more profound or better? We walk into a supermarket and a sterile plastic object is just sitting there, and it looks appetizing and we visualize it as a steak. We have no connection to that animal. That animal might have lived the worst life possible that we could imagine, trapped within some giant shack, getting fed crap all its life, feeling sick all the time, full of parasites, riddled with stuff. We never see these cows, and then they're carted off in some lonely, depressing truck, thrown into some stinky, smelly truck with a load of other animals, no one to explain to them, and they're brought inside then this giant, weird smelling, cold, strange factory with all these weird machines and men standing around in Hamzat suits. And their last lonely moments are the weird sounds of pistons and machine pins moving around them as they're funneled down into these like giant shiny metal sheets before some faceless guy holds some thing in front of him and he just starts looking. This weird, indifferent, alien-like experience is us Europeans best attempt at making a more humane and moral and cruelty-free experience. But we do lose something because of this. We throw out something like 1/3 of all the meat that we consume. Half of the animals that we kill, their carcasses are tossed into the trash anyway. Before every inch of the animal was eaten, it was worshipped, I guess you could say. They would boil the animal's head and eat its nose and eat its tongue. Everything, the bones would be melted down and transformed into like shoes and glues. It's actually amazing looking at what people used to get out of animals. But now we just say, give us the rump steak, give us the T-bones, the ribeyes. We don't really want all of the rest of the stuff. We just toss that aside. It gets flung out and it's useless. It might get thrown to dogs or something like this. It's humane, but it's valueless. Funny that. We don't care as much as we used to. And there's also a profound flip side of this, a dark flip side of this, is that even though it's cruelty free, the scale of what we do now is enormous. One animal might have been killed a month, maybe every 2 weeks, in a particularly big tribe, and it would have fed pretty much everybody for a long time. But now we have millions of animals dying a day. Millions across the world are murdered in these giant, chillingly efficient factories of humanity. They are flooded through this system and their heads are cut off by machines, one by one by one. There are men standing there just slitting throats all day and bleeding these out. Also, these animals can get churned up and turned into burgers that people will take 4 bites of while they're drunk on a Saturday night and then throw on the floor. Our inherent violence and the inherent violence of life is incredibly difficult for us to overcome. No matter how perfect of a system we make, nature can sneak in. We try to make the cleanest, cruelty-free system we can possibly make, but the savagery of nature is going to find a way to rear her ugly head, and it's hard for us to deal with this. And never mind the monstrousness inside of man himself. You can find countless gruesome videos of workers online in these slaughterhouses losing their tempers and abusing the animals, smacking them, hurting them, taking advantage of the weapons and tools that they have. It's quite horrible stuff when you see it. You realize that nowadays, one of the most elaborate forms of torture in history is the systemized animal slaughter factory farms that go all across the world in order to feed us the junk that we want to make us obese and fat. What we look down upon as primal, as barbaric as in the past, which is sacrifice, what that brought us in the past may seem ugly and savage, but it connected us to life. It established a meaning to everything that we gained. It made us value what we have. But now, in our moral age, which is an age of abundance, we feel that we have overcome cruelty and nature. And so we've developed this weird, twisted, soulless attitude. Nothing has any value anymore. Nothing has any meaning. Nothing has any purpose. We have lost our connection to all these things. The hard truth is that we cannot hide these realities from ourselves without them manifesting as something twisted and malevolent. And in our sterile, atheist, and good modern world, we might believe that we're past this, but when we lift up the stone and we confront these ugly truths, under the mundane parts of our life, like the 3 meals that we eat a day and the lump of meat that sits on top of them, many people wake up and we spiral out of control and we become confused. People lambast this entire practice and say to themselves, I'm going to become a vegan and I'm going to go against my healthiest natural diet, which is a carnivore meat-based diet as far as I'm concerned. And instead I'm going to try reject this on moral principles. And I completely understand why they do. After looking through all this, I think you'd be crazy not to think like a vegan. Because they're confronting this trauma. They're trying to decide what to do. And then you'll have the people who react to this and try to pretend that they're above it all. That they're like, bro, I'm just going to eat my meat and I don't care. Oh, it looks like a tasty burger and all this. And these people can't deal with the intensity of the trauma and the cruelty that they're facing, the savageness of nature that hides under the surfaces of our systems. And so they come up with some kind of weird, pathetic defense mechanism where they try to pretend it's a tough guy thing to have some dude dressed in an apron murder your cows for you. And ultimately, I'm not here to tell you that there's a morally righteous way of doing things or something like this. What I'm trying to point out to you is that mankind has been struggling with these fundamental questions for millions of years. And the primal trauma that a vegan experiences, that a dork tries to protect themselves from by coming up with some rationalization about him being a tough guy, that trauma, that guilt, that pain is one of man's biggest struggles. And you can see this elaborate way that we've gone in dealing with this. And the entire purpose of religion on some level was to help us deal with these primary questions. Why does life involve death? Why does something have to suffer for me to live, for me to be happy and thrive? What is this relationship that's going on? And it's quite profound in a very Jungian sense that people cannot find God because they do not look low enough. And when you suddenly start to look into these boring, down-to-earth, weird things like your food and animals and all this stuff that you wouldn't think is that mighty, you'd rather read Marcus Aurelius's writings or Nietzsche or something like this. But instead just meditating on and contemplating that lump of meat that's sustaining you, or that lump of meat that somebody refuses to question themselves, you start to see inside the nature of our time, the grand attempts that European people have made in the last 200, 300 years to make a moral civilization, the successes that they have had in removing quite a lot of cruelty, and also many of the failures, the difficulty in actually getting rid of that cruelty without it sublimating and becoming hidden and becoming distorted and strange. And it can also allow you to ask some big questions about what would a future society look like that would be going in the right direction? Should we continue to aspire to get rid of this type of cruelty from our systems that hold together our society and our lives? Is there virtue and value in that? I can tell you for certain that if you go and make sure you find the highest quality grass-fed meats, you're going to get a much happier cow that's probably going to die in a much more noble and dignified way. And at the very least, that's going to lead to better health for you, which is a strange, interesting form of karma. When you take the time to find the very, very best stuff you can find, you are rewarded with it in turn. When you find some farmer who honors his livestock, you get rewarded with better health, which is the primal law showing up once again. And maybe this is something on the horizon for us in the West, a new way of thinking like this. And something about our age being so atheist, so anti-religious, so above all this type of stuff. It's funny how these things show their ugly faces and force themselves onto our table, that despite our rationality and our morality, we see a great deal of sterility, of valuelessness, of the nihilism that Nietzsche talked about, manifest in these simple choices. So I hope you enjoyed my episode here on animal sacrifice, human sacrifice, and vegans. Perhaps you found my storytelling compelling. My capacity to present my ideas using my voice has bewitched you. You've said to yourself, how is he so talented? How is he so capable of showing up in a badly ironed linen shirt with his hairy chest popping out, and bewitch me to listen to some guy rant about other people cutting out people's hearts for an hour or however long this goes on for? Maybe you might say that to yourself. This Steph, he has the panache, the charisma, the speaking skills are oozing out of him. Well, my friends, I recommend you then check out my program. In there, I have several breakdowns of how you can develop these skills. You can develop these capacity to rant about human sacrifice like me. I talk about how to train your mind so that you can develop a much better visual imagination to make your stories more captivating, to give you this ability to paint pictures inside of people's heads, because isn't that the essence of good communication? I have course material on how you can develop your voice, the formal training that I went through when I was a younger man, learning to sing and speak and write and all these things as well. I have things on writing skills and how to develop good scripts in case you are one of those people who needs to read stuff all the time. All of that stuff is available down below if you would like to check it out. And you might say to yourself on top of that, good Lord, Steph, it's impressive how you've built for yourself this YouTube channel for you to promote your extremist rants about cruelty and cutting people's legs off and skinning people alive. I'd love to have something like that. I'd love to have a YouTube channel that I could pontificate upon and present my messages to the world? Well, of course, I have grown quite a good platform here, which is absolutely fantastic. And I've worked with other people in doing this as well. So maybe you'd be interested in utilizing your storytelling skills to create for yourself your own little TV channel where you can rant about crazy extremism. That could be an interesting thing for you to do. So if that floats your boat, I've actually got quite good at training people on how to set up operations like this. So I recommend you check in the link down below. I'll have videos explaining this more, and you can go and you can sign up in order to learn how I could coach you in doing this. And you can join our mastermind where we take people focused on building these type of creator assets so that they have these modern TV channels in their favor and a YouTube channel that's propagating their propaganda out into the world. So if you're interested in that, storytelling, speaking skills, improving the capacity of your imagination to paint pictures inside people's heads with powerful stories, the ability for you to take all this stuff and turn it into new creative assets on YouTube, perhaps even to sprinkle in a little bit of AI skill in there as well. I'm sure you've noticed the pretty pictures that have been going on here. All of that will be available down below for you to check out. My educational resources are down there for you to explore. So if any of this stuff interests you, check it all out. Thank you very much for your time. Stay juicy. Bye-bye.